What's going on, everyone? The Galactic Championship is just 2 days away, which means you better be preparing. And today we get to dive into some of the most dangerous cards you are expected to see at the Galactic Championship. There's a lot of decks, including things like Han Blue, Han Green, Talzin Red, etc., that are all using new cards from Set 5 and some old classics. But I wanted to focus in on the ones that are the most impactful in your games. There's a ton of cards you could consider to be cards that you want to be playing around and thinking about. And yes, if we went over every single card in the game, this video would be ridiculously long, to the point where I'd probably have to divide it up into multiple videos. Instead, I wanted to focus on a select few cards that are really important to think about as you're going through, because they could be absolute blowouts, causing you to win the game, or rather lose the game, depending on the situation, immediately. That said, a big thank you to my patrons, guys. We will be meeting up in just a couple of days here, and I will see probably a lot of you at the Galactic Championship, so I can't wait to hang out. And let's dive into our first one. Come on now. We knew Force Throw was going to be on the list, guys. This is probably the most disgusting card in terms of what its capability is when you are fighting up against those Force aggression decks. Yes, the card does have some limitations, and yes, it's not necessarily the most broken card you have ever seen in some cases, but in other cases it can be. The ability to use one resource to potentially not only mess with your opponent's hand, but also in some cases kill their unit, is an incredible potential. On another note, it might also just be one resource, deal 1 damage to a unit, and make your opponent discard a card. So I think this is a really important factor. One of the things that you're really going to want to be playing around with Force Throw, and if you're playing as Force Throw, is to really incorporate kind of adapting and expecting that your opponent's just going to discard their own cards. I think this is something that is different from previous iterations of the sets. In previous iterations of sets, Force Throw was more of a mid to late game card. Like, you wouldn't necessarily be able to play this early on into the game, mainly because you didn't have a lot of Force units to work with Force Throw. Nowadays, there are multiple, like 9 units in many decks that you can play on turn 1 that's going to enable Force Throw for turn 2 and onwards, which means that it's very likely for your opponent not only just to be playing Force Throw, but also some other cheap events, things like Force Lightning or things like Sorceress Blast or whatever other card people are playing that are a little bit cheaper. And so one of the things that people have really shifted towards more focusing, and this isn't necessarily anything new in some cases, but it's much more to be expected, is to just discard their own cards. And this is something that basically every single aggression deck is basically going to have. The exception maybe being Sabine, as that one's going to be more of a traditional just aggro deck. Basically every other aggression deck that you will find yourself up against, you should be expecting Force Throw, which is very different from previous sets. This was not something that a lot of decks could run because they didn't have the options to run those Force units. This thing will annihilate basically anything. There are a lot of more late game plays in the game. The decks are more mid-range focused. So if you're fighting against like Han Blue, for example, expect things like Luke Skywalker, Redemptions, big Mace Windus, whatever other cards that they decide to play. There's almost always some sort of 6, 7, 8, 9 drop that you could discard with Force Throw to nag something for 7, 8, 9 damage. This thing easily kills leaders oftentimes, which is something that a lot of people try to play around. This thing annihilates things like with Chewbacca pilot on them, because it's not based on really kind of annihilating or preventing your units from being defeated. It is insane. Absolutely insane. So definitely something that you're going to want to think about. And probably the most dangerous part about this is because it's one resource, this could kind of sneak into a lot of different plays in a turn. And a lot of people are like, oh, they made this big play, they can't do anything else. But guess what? They still have the potential to Force Throw you. This one should come as no surprise as well. The brand new Darth Vader, probably the most hyped card of the entire set. This card is disgusting. We're starting to see a lot more people try to adapt into Kira ECL, Kylo ECL, Talzin ECL. But even if you're not running ECL, it is still something that you have to consider in many parts of the game if they're playing Vigilance, Villainy, Command. Now, this 6-drop unit coming down as a 5/6 may not seem all that threatening, but remember, you're going to be able to defeat basically any unit you choose when he comes down and is able to attack with ambush. And that's the key factor. A lot of the times people are playing things like Kiadi Mundi, things with, maybe even less toughness as in the earlier portions of the game, or just playing whatever unit they have. And even though it may not just die straight up, Darth Vader's going to come in and deal damage. But the big thing about this is oftentimes a lot of these vigilance villainy command decks are deploying things to the board nowadays. So you're going to get a Kira on the board, you're going to get a Townsend on the board, and you kind of have to deploy more into those decks in order to deal with their units. And that's where Darth Vader comes in and could potentially knock out 2 units with a single ambush, leaving behind a 5/6 body, which is disgustingly powerful. And that's kind of the name of the game with Darth Vader, is that you really have to be balancing when you're able to actually overwhelm your opponent and when you're going to get absolutely blown out and have 0 chance. Now, as per usual, you should always be playing towards your win, not just playing to not lose. But with Darth Vader, there is a very fine line. And oftentimes, the biggest mistake that I see a lot of people make is, I got a space strategy. I'm rolling in with a couple space units. I've got a good setup right now. I'm going to deploy my leader and, maybe get in a little bit of extra damage. And then boom, suddenly Darth Vader, he come in and ambush your leader while also putting a shield token on your space unit. You lose your space unit and you're probably going to lose your leader, which just ended up harming you more than benefiting you. Things like this, especially with like you Vader yellows over there, or even like the Poe greens that I've seen. Not that these are going to be, Vader yellow will be an extremely popular deck, but Poe green remains to be seen. But this also applies to just decks in general, figuring out, okay, how is Vader going to attack? What can I afford? Should I be putting up a Sentinel in order for him not to absolutely completely blow me out? Or is that even going to matter? And is my Sentinel just going to die and then still lose another unit? Should I have attacked Darth Vader, get rid of the shield token? All these different considerations need to be made around the ECL turn, which is 6 resources. As soon as you have that 6 resources, you should be expecting a Darth Vader. Basically, everyone, if they have Darth Vader, is keeping it in their hand in order for them to ECL when it comes time to ECL it out. Another new card from the set is the new Mace Windu. This 6-drop ground unit 6/6 overwhelm is very similar to your Wreckers of the world, which is something that we absolutely had to play around in the previous sets, albeit a little bit less popular these days outside of Sabine. This 6/6 comes down, uses the Force to deal 4 damage to something. This is absolutely being played in basically every Force strategy that has aggression, heroism in it. Think, Han Solo, Mace Windu. You've got, maybe you're playing Obi-Wan Red, Mace Windu. You're playing any combination of heroism, aggression with Force, Mace Windu's probably going to be in the deck as a 2 or 3 of. It's because it is comparable to that Wrecker. It becomes a big body, it gets to overwhelm through a bunch of units. It has that Force tag, which is absolutely incredible. But most importantly is that it comes down and does something immediately, which is deal 4 damage to something. This is definitely something you have to consider. Whether it's, hey, I can't lose, they can't do anything to immediately impact the board, or maybe it's, do I want to decide to attack a unit or attack base? If I attack this unit and kill it, am I in a better position because maybe they can play Mace Windu and delete my unit, lead or whatever it is? Or do I just attack base and make them use their actions to deal with my board and try to race them? Those are the types of decisions that you have to make. 4 damage is a lot, but it's oftentimes not quite enough to finish off a unit. So when you're getting close to that 6 resource turn, this one oftentimes not played with ECL, but just rather a regularly played unit, well, you got to think about, okay, how is this damage? How is this 4 damage that's going to come down going to be able to interact with my board? It's very similar to Luke Skywalker when 7 resources comes. When you get to 7 resources against vigilance, heroism, you should be expecting a Luke Skywalker to come down. And if you are, then how you attack, whether you attack units or you just attack with certain units that can be killed by that unit, is going to change. And the same thing should be applying to Mace Windu. And in fact, one of the most popular decks to play this in is the Han Solo deck, which means you should be expecting this on turn 4 at 5 resources, the same turn that Han Solo deploys, because you can get this down a turn earlier using the Force and getting you access to a nice Force 6/4 body with that 4 damage coming in, which is pretty oppressive. And the next one we've got is our Heroism Vader of the world, Kelleran Beq. 7-drop ground unit command heroism, the 7/7. That searches the top 7 cards of your deck for a unit to reveal it and play it, costing 3 less, is absolutely incredible. And one of the big things is, yes, there are a lot of very, very important plays in the game, and we could talk about things like Power of the Dark Side or Overwhelming Barrage and a bunch of cards that can shift the game. And, well, some of those are going to be talked about on this list. But these types of cards with Kelleran Beq oftentimes are there to bring you back out of those cards. Things like the Overwhelming Barrage or the Super Laser Blast of the world. And if that's the case, you need to be timing Kelleran Beq very, very well. In a lot of cases, Kelleran Beq gets more valuable the longer you wait. And so when you're fighting an opponent with heroism or you're playing the Kelleran Beq of the world, yes, you could blow him at 7, and there's nothing wrong with that necessarily. It is important to remember that Super Laser Blast comes right after, so you need to be expecting someone to be able to hold this, because the fact that it costs 3 less to play that card off the top means that they could pick up a 5-drop and still fully utilize their resources on 9. And if they pick up like a home 1 later when they're on like 12 resources, guess what? They're going to be able to play home 1 too. So the fact that you can scale this based on how many resources you have, for the most part, makes Kelleran Beq an extremely scary card when he comes down on 7, but also when he comes down on 12, and it's even more scary. Kelleran Beq bringing along a home 1, which also brings along an Obi-Wan or a Grogu or whatnot, is disgusting and absolutely needs to be considered, as this can completely shift the game, not only giving you multiple bodies and overwhelming your opponent in certain situations like that, but arguably more importantly, by allowing your opponent to potentially just rebuilding their absolute defenses to prevent you from actually winning the game. There are a lot of situations, like if you're playing Obi-Wan Blue, where they can bring back Chirruts, or bring Chirruts off the top and put up Sentinel blockades, or they're bringing, Luke Skywalker's even is very, very common on 11 resources, and it's not super unlikely to reach those later stages of the game with ramp and just the way the decks interact with each other. This is definitely one that you're going to have to consider. It wouldn't be a proper list if I hadn't spoken about Overwhelming Barrage, and I kind of alluded to it when we talked about Kelleran Beq. This 5-cost event has been a dominant mainstay since the inception of the game, arguably the most powerful event in the entire game, and I stuffed it from the top 10 uncommons list back in the day, and I'm making it up for it every day since. Give a friendly unit +2/+2 and making it so that you can deal as much damage as they have power to units as you choose is disgusting. This is one of the most impressive tools for decks like Kira or Kylo in some situations to maintain control and actually even more so dominate the board when it comes down. It is one of the cards that makes Kira as incredible as it is, and it's also one of the cards that makes Villainy Command one of the most disgusting decks in the game. This thing is obviously an absolute blowout for you Vader Yellow players out there, as it will just dominate the entire situation. Sanctioner Shuttle having lower toughness, all your 1/1s, your 1 toughness units, they all get picked off. It's one of the reasons why Bombing Run is a sideboard card and Overwhelming Barrage is a threat to be had. But it's also, well, not just for people who are playing Vader Yellow, but also people fighting against Vader Yellow or Kira Green or any command villainy deck at all, because all of them run Overwhelming Barrage, and you have to be prepared for it. Whether it's how you are attacking with your units and stacking up damage on them. If I attack the base, am I going to be able to get more value out of my units rather than attacking a unit which they're just going to be able to kill with Overwhelming Barrage directly after? How you yourself play Overwhelming Barrage is also an incredibly important thing to make sure you're actually playing it in the right spot, because in some cases using it on a smaller unit is actually going to be beneficial. There's so many games where I've seen Overwhelming Barrage be played on like a Super Laser Technician, and it's still an incredible play because you still get to deal 4 damage and then get in for another 4 damage with Super Laser Technician itself. It's not like killing the Super Laser Technician really harms you all that much anyways. So yeah, this card is going to be absolutely all over the place for every single command villainy deck, and most decks that are playing the Vader are also going to be pairing Vader Villainy Vigilance with command, and so you have to contend with Overwhelming Barrage and Darth Vader in the same deck, and in some cases It's just too much to be able to deal with, which is why they're solid decks. The next one is probably the most obnoxious Sentinel in the game at the current moment, and that is Chirrut. This is one of those cards that, as I mentioned many times at this point, but the 3/5 body isn't that scary to begin with Sentinel. However, we've seen Perimeter ATRT do some good work. But this isn't just for the Perimeter ATRT style of deck, which is the Kira deck, right? This is more for any force-based deck that's playing Vigilance. Any force-based deck playing Vigilance has to consider Chirrut. Whether you're playing as the Vigilance deck or you're playing against the Vigilance deck, you better be expecting Chirrut at least to be showing up in the sideboard. Pulling this guy in when there's a bunch of ground aggression and putting up this Sentinel up against maybe some smaller units just completely disrupts the aggressive curve and a lot of combat strategy. Because the problem is that it's not really a 3/5 in oftentimes. You can kind of think of it as having a lot more toughness, like +2 toughness per attack. Think of it this way. If you attack for a 3/5, you're getting hit for 1 damage, right? That's basically as if it had 7 toughness because of its ability on Chirrut. And it's also really important to remember that in forced decks, it's not uncommon to be able to trigger Chirrut's ability multiple times in a single turn. Think of Vigilance Heroism as an example. First off, you could curve out with Yaddle into, well, all manner of really, but let's say Ray Green, right? You could go Yaddle into Yoda or Obi-Wan into Chirrut, and suddenly not only do you have double Sentinel if you have Obi-Wan, but each one of those prior units, if you have the force space, allows you to trigger the force again and again and again, which makes it so that all your early game units, and by the way, the things that you play on turn 1 and turn 2, are oftentimes not high enough power to actually make a dent into Chirrut, which means you're relying on removal options. And if you're relying on removal options, you're probably in a pretty good position as the player who's playing Chirrut, because you're just trying to get later in the game. But it's not just that. There's also a lot of decks that are running things like Entrenched to drop onto their Chirrut, which makes it a 6/9, which means not only is it killing your units, but it's incredibly difficult to get off the board unless you have hard removal, which some decks do not. And if you do not, that's why Chirruts sit in the sideboard, so just be expecting to have to deal with this as an obnoxious Sentinel. Following on the heels of Force Throw, we have Force Lightning, by far the most impressive other card from set 1 that's based around force units that got a lot better. This one, instead, well, has a little bit of a different dynamic. And the reason why it's so important to pay attention is because how resource efficient this can be. 3 damage, you're getting, or 3 resources, you're getting 4 damage. 4 resources, you're getting 6 damage. 5 resources, you're getting 8 damage, which is enough to take out a leader unit on 5 resources. Things like Towson, things like Quinlan, all falter under the Force Lightning power. And this is one to be expecting a lot from your Towson Reds of the world, but basically any Force deck that's running aggression, because a lot of the times people are manipulating their deck to utilize this with Anakin, and this is a very important factor. I've seen a lot of Han Blues incorporate Anakin into their list as well as Force Lightning, because even in a off aspect consideration, this thing is going to ramp up incredibly nicely. And not only is it going to be an effective resource anyways, because of its rate is so good, it's also just going to be good because it's going to pump up that Anakin's ability to do some work. And I'm talking about the 6-drop Anakin that gives the -3/-3 if you have a villainy and heroism card in your discard pile. But more importantly, arguably, is the fact that it also gets rid of abilities on units. I see a lot of people not think about this one when it's coming in, but if there's some sort of when defeated trigger, well, boom, suddenly you're able to remove that off that unit and get a huge advantage out of it. And that's really, really critical. Your Super Laser Technicians, your Sentinels out there, they can just be dwarfed. And that is tough to deal with because not only is it an efficient removal option, and we have a ton of interaction in the game, but it's also able to manipulate the board in a way that most other events and plays in the game cannot. Force Lightning, be ready for it. And lastly, we've got General's Blade. Now, this one is definitely a scary one. There are a lot of ways to play around it, like a couple of cards on this list for sure. But this 3-cost upgrading command coming down on a Jedi unit not only gives it +3/+3, which is a really nice way to dominate the board in the early game, but more importantly, starts ramping by 2 resources every single turn. The power of this is just how buried you get in value on the board as soon as you give them just a single turn with General's Blade. Even on the turn that General's Blade comes down. Oftentimes, before, there weren't enough Jedi units to actually make this a scary card. But now we have Yaddle, Adi Gallia, Gunji as 3 very, very solid options and the most common options to be playing General's Blade on. All 3 of them have 4 or more toughness, and in Gunji's case, even with like a Cad Bane or Tarkin Town, or a Cad Bane or Quinlan Ping plus Tarkin Town, lives through it. So it's really tough to deal with these units, which means you basically have a guaranteed target on turn 2 for General's Blade, which is why it's become so popular. And then as you put General's Blade down, you could play another 2-drop on that turn you play General's Blade, so you don't even lose that many resource value portions of your turns in the early game, and you're still left with a 5-8 or a 5-7, and that is disgusting. But then on the next turn, let's say you're Krevin out, you could drop Mace Windu, the Mace Windu we just talked about before, on turn 3. Which means you need to be prepared for this. Whether it's playing a unit expecting General's Blade comes down or being able to deal with a General's Blade if it shows up on turn 2 is really important. I've seen a lot of games where people, oh, this seems like a reasonable hand, but your opponent goes General's Blade on turn 2 and they're playing that Vigilance deck, which, well, should be a risky play from your opponent in the first place, but let's say they do it anyways to go for the highest upside. Well, suddenly you're stuck in a position where you don't have any power on the dark side and you get buried in resource advantage. And that's the scary part about General's Blade. Making sure you have some way to deal with it. It's oftentimes why a lot of people have upgrade hate in the resource or in the sideboard nowadays, because you have cards, not just General's Blade, but also Fallen Lightsaber and Trench that are pretty common in the meta nowadays, whereas before upgrades weren't nearly as common as they were now. Darksaber is one, but now we're getting decks that are playing mid-range styles with upgrades that are played on turn 2. That's a scary concept. And those are the cards that I wanted to let you all know about. Those are the danger cards. There's a lot more. You could talk about all manner of different cards. You could be talking about Power of the Dark Side. You could be talking about some of the leaders in the game. You could be talking about Super Laser Blast. You could be talking about all different options. These are the ones that I think are just some of the most prominent ones that, well, are the most game significant. Yes, Power of the Dark Side at the right time can be a really big hit. But if you get an overlying Barrage in the right time, it could lose you the game or win you the game. Same thing with General's Blade, same thing with Chirrut, same thing with the Well-Placed Force Lightning, and the same thing with all the other cards on this list. Probably the most scary of them all, as we talked about first, was Force Throw. Just being able to use one resource to do that much disruption is a scary thought. So when you're playing through your games, you should just be thinking about these, depending on the deck you're fighting, as you're going along. Thanks for watching. Let me know what your danger cards are in the comment section down below, and I'll see you all for the next one.